In this context, to share a little bit about Laureate, Laureate is a global education network. We have more than 50 universities in 24 countries, and each of them work very hard, as Anhembi does, to make a positive contribution in the community. And what we're doing in Sao Paulo, for me, is very powerful. When you look at the students, some of the students that were outside with us, some of the students that are behind joining us later, because these students have an opportunity to have a world-class education, the hospitality students here at Anhembi, where we bring content from Switzerland, 2.5 years worth of education, and they have it here in Sao Paulo, and they pay Sao Paulo prices. They have education, accreditation from Switzerland. Very, very important to us. And with this approach, we have almost 600,000 students throughout the world in these 50 countries, 24 countries, I apologize. In this context, then, when we have the opportunity, when we have the day to share a moment with a guest as distinguished as yourself, I can only feel enthusiasm the way you do. It was almost like a wedding where we're waiting for the important words. As mentioned, Mr. Blair held the position of Prime Minister of Great Britain for 10 years, from 1997 to 2007. As we were doing some research, we found that always the visionary, he believed that traditional power should start sooner rather than later to share the table with emerging powers, like Brazil, like China, like India. And back in 2005, you invited these countries to participate in the G8 summit. It is very forward-looking. Another very important achievement when you were in office was to bring the Olympic Games to London, something that Brazil is looking forward to as well on the receiving end. In addition to your accomplishments where you were in office, since leaving office in 2007, you have been very well involved in world affairs. You're currently working in the Middle East as Quartet representative, helping the Palestinians to prepare for statehood as part of the international community's efforts. You've also launched the Tony Blair Faith Foundation to promote respect and understanding between the major world religions. And finally, and some of the projects that we also hold dear and near at Laureate, your work in Africa and climate change, including governance projects in Rwanda and Liberia, advising the leaders on policy delivery and attracting investments, reflect the themes that Laureate and Anhembi and the different institutions throughout the world advocate. So with that said, welcome, benvindo. We look very much forward to hearing your words today, and we will wrap up after that.
Thank you very much indeed, and Mr. Rector, Vice Rector, Senator Marina Silva, Senator Eduardo, Secretary of State for Education here in Sao Paulo, Alexandra Schneider, distinguished guests, and ladies and gentlemen, it's a wonderful privilege to be here at Anhembi Morumbi University to say a word of thanks to, not just to the university for hosting me here, but to Laureate for the fabulous work they do worldwide in the field of education, which I have seen myself in different parts of the world. And it gives me an opportunity also to come back to Brazil, because in addition to inviting Brazil to the G8 summit in 2005, I was also the first British Prime Minister to visit Brazil on a bilateral basis as Prime Minister. So I consider myself quite prophetic about the rise of Brazil. So it's always a pleasure to be back here and to see the extraordinary and fantastic progress that the country is making. And as I was explaining to some people earlier today, my middle son actually came to spend a week in Brazil. And after a month, he had still not come back. So I think there's obviously something really good going on here, but probably best that I don't discover. So I'm going to talk to you today about my view about education, a subject about which I am passionate. And I'd like to begin by setting education in the global context. If we identify the characteristics of the modern world, I think we find there are these. The world today is interdependent, interconnected, like never before. If you look at the economic crisis, and you think how a problem in the subprime mortgage market in the south of the United States ended up collapsing financial institutions, creating a crisis everywhere. I remember in September 2008, with the collapse of the Lehman Brothers Bank, and sitting in my house in London, and the top of the news was Lehman Brothers. And even in the most remote part of England, this name Lehman Brothers was suddenly everywhere. Right? No one had ever heard of this thing. I remember coming out of my house to go to work that morning, and someone recognized me and stopped me and said, "Who are these brothers?" And it was like some really bad brothers had come to town and messed the place up, and there was going to be trouble. But, you know, this sense of a world today that is joined together like never before, it's very powerful. And power, the other characteristic is that power is shifting. Power is shifting from America and Europe to the East, to nations like Brazil. When I recognized as the chairman of the G8 that we had to have the major emerging powers, it was, yes, diplomatic, it was also realistic. And today, really, the G20 has replaced the G8, in effect. And this is very hard for us Europeans and the North Americans. Suddenly, we have to realize this is a different world today, and power will have to be shared, and decisions will have to be made on the basis of partnership, and it will be very challenging, I think, for people. And not just Brazil and China and India, countries like Indonesia, countries like Mexico, Colombia. So the power relationship in the world is changing. And the final thing, the final characteristic I would identify of the world today is the speed of change. You know, this is the thing that is so extraordinary. When I contemplate the technology today that is available and think of my own children and how their lives are changing as a result of this. And, you know, when I left office as Prime Minister, when I was Prime Minister, I never had a mobile phone even. Okay, they always worried who might call me up. They didn't think I was safe to be left alone with a mobile phone. So I get my first day after leaving office, I get my first mobile phone, right? My new technology. I'm very excited. And I decide to send an SMS to someone, okay? So I send them an SMS saying, "Hi, how are you?" Right? And I don't realize that my name doesn't come up on the mobile. So they send me a message back saying, "Sorry, but who are you?" And I'm thinking, it's been 24 hours, you know? You're forgotten quickly in this business. But now you think of how our children live and how they will do their work with a computer and now the iPad and so on. And it's a world in which companies, countries, and even individuals have to be prepared to adapt quickly to change. So, the characteristics of the world, it is interconnected, the power relationships are changing, the speed of change is unprecedented. There is a political consequence of this as well. I think that the distinction between left and right today in politics is important. But it's less important in the 21st century than it was in the 20th century. I think every bit as important a distinction today is what I would call open versus closed. In other words, when you see this force of change and globalization, is your response to open up to it and to see it as an opportunity? Or is your response to it to see it essentially as a threat and something you want to close off from you? And we see this in many, many different ways. We see it politically. You know, do countries want to be engaged with the world? Are they out there, reaching out, forming alliances, forming partnerships, or do they try to keep hold of what they have? We see it economically, for sure, in debates over trade and protectionism. Do we think it's good to open our economy up, or do we want to protect what we have? And as important as anything else, we see it culturally as well. Do we see our societies and the way they're changing? Do we see this as positive or negative? Now, Brazil is a remarkable country. One of the things that is most remarkable about you, that people often don't understand from the outside, is what an extraordinary blend, a mixture of different backgrounds and different nationalities have come to make up modern Brazil. But in Europe at the moment, you could fight any election campaign on immigration. Across Europe at the moment, and wider than Europe too, issues to do with how different religious faiths live and work together is very powerful and occasionally very menacing, very dangerous. If you take government, the lessons of governance today around the world are very, very clear, as I shall say in a moment in respect of education. And whether we like it or not, technology is posing a challenge the whole time to people in the world. Do you feel yourself part of this changing global environment that is pushing people together? Or do you feel yourself threatened or excluded or left behind? So what that is doing is it's creating a different type of politics. Left versus right is still there. But, you know, I sometimes think, and I say this very honestly as a politician from the left side of politics, but who is prepared to work across the political spectrum, sometimes I think we spend a lot of our time as politicians searching for the difference, because otherwise we don't feel comfortable. Whereas actually, today some of these issues really require a different policy approach altogether. Less ideological, more practical, but not less idealistic. And this distinction of open versus closed is a distinction that runs throughout the whole of politics today. Isolationist or engaged, responsible for the world or responsible for your own country. As a person, feeling a global citizen as well as a citizen of your own country.